Good morning, good afternoon. I think we now have every panelist, so I'm going to start the meeting. Thank you all for joining, dear distinguished national liaison officers, national liaison assistants, counterparts, participants. Dear panelists, thank you for joining this IAEA webinar today on procurement of equipment and services through the Technical Cooperation Program. We're going to have 2 hours together, and we will be having a few elements here that I would like to share with you very briefly. So this session is provided in English. We will have an interactive session where you will be and where we are expected to engage in various exercises. We'll have a quiz at some point during the presentation, and you also have the chat box on WebEx that you can be also using for if you are experiencing any technical issues, for example, or also to use towards all the duration of the session, the Q&A, and contact all different presenters to send out your questions. Next slide, please. So we will also be sharing this recorded session that will be made available on the TC website. And this is also part of a series of webinars. So today's session is the first out of 2 sessions that are taking place in January on the 2 major components of IAEA TC program, human resource and procurement. So this webinar series aims to bring together the project team to understand the roles, the responsibilities, and expected actions by each member, ensuring the smooth implementation of the respective component, supporting the TC project to meet its objective and outcome in a timely manner. Next slide, please. So as I said, today we will focus on the procurement of equipment and services through the TC program. Next slide. So the objective of this session is to understand the procurement process, to get to know the elements of a technical specification and how to develop one, but also to understand the national liaison officer and counterpart role throughout the procurement process. So my name is Vincent Rouet, and I am a program management officer in the division for Asia and the Pacific within the Department of Technical Cooperation. And I'm going to be your moderator today. Once again, don't hesitate to use the Q&A in the chat box to interact with us throughout the duration of this session. Our presenters today are Mr. Javier Romero, who is also a program management officer in the division for Asia and the Pacific, and has extensive experience in the management of the TC program and has worked for several years at the Department of Technical Cooperation of the IAEA. We also have Sally Alvarez de Schreiner, who is part of the Office of Procurement Services at the IAEA. Mrs. Alvarez de Schreiner leads the team supporting the IAEA procurement function on general strategic procurements and policy matters, including initiatives related to continuous improvement, outreach activities, and capacity building in support of the successful implementation of the IAEA programmatic endeavors. We also have today Mr. James Jacob Sassania, who is a technical officer in charge of food safety and has been working here at the IAEA for some years, implementing several procurements. We have Dr. Noor Faiza Mohammad Hassan, who is the National Liaison Officer of Malaysia. He has a PhD in chemical engineering and brings over 26 years of experience in radioactive sealed source and radio tracer technology aspects. Currently, he is appointed as Director of Planning and International Relations Division of Malaysian Nuclear Agency. We also have a counterpart from Malaysia, Dr. Kamarudin Samundi, who was previously involved in TC projects under the Isotope Hydrology Division. Mr. Kamarudin holds a PhD in environmental engineering and is doing research on the application of environmental isotope in various spectrum of groundwater and environmental problems. Currently, he is appointed as a Director of Waste Technology and Environmental Division of the Malaysian Nuclear Agency. We are also pleased to have Ms. Piambadoj Tuyatsetsek from Mongolia, who is currently working as National Liaison Assistant for Mongolia. She is the head of Foreign Affairs Division of the Nuclear Energy Commission of Mongolia and has many years of professional experience in logistics and HR management. Thank you all again for being here today, both from the presenters and from the participant sides. And I'm now going to hand over to Javier.
Thank you, Vincent. Just to let you know, I seem to have a problem with my camera, so I will keep this background, but still it's not working. So I just only will be hearing my voice. Thank you again, Vincent, and greetings to all of you, panelists and participants. As Vincent mentioned in today's session, we talk about the procurement of equipment and services through the TC program. I will start briefly talking about the TC policy framework that help us implement this component. The TC strategy is for the cooperation to develop the capacities of the member states or countries participating for achieving socioeconomic impact. Thus, the procurement of equipment and services and the development of human resources is driven from the member states' needs and requirements. So it's needs-based. The revised supplementary agreement is the official document signed by the IEA and the governments for the provision of technical assistance. And this agreement describes the responsibility of both the member state government and the agency. Specifically, Article 5 of this agreement stipulates that the equipment and materials provided shall be used only for peaceful applications of the atomic energy. It also stipulates that the title to equipment is transferred to the counterpart of the member state upon release from the customer at the port of entry, meaning that after custom clearance, the counterparts become the owner of the equipment. The IEA supports the process of custom clearance, of course, and therefore the goods are delivered at the terminal and not to the beneficiary institution. The counterpart is responsible for bearing the cost of preparation, premises, inland transport if it's needed, proper operation and maintenance, storage, and disposal, and any other expenses within the country that may arise. And now I would like to give the floor to Sally.
And good morning to all panelists and participants. I am Sally Alvarez de Schreiner, Senior Procurement Officer in the Office of Procurement Services at the IAEA. I am honored and grateful for all of us having this opportunity today to introduce you to IAEA procurement. Let me start saying that the IAEA, as any public entity, is accountable for the public funds it is spending. Therefore, similar to other organizations, the IAEA follows the procurement principles of transparency, and the state now issues of the programmatic goals.
Sally, Vincent speaking. I'm just interrupting you briefly. I think we have issues with hearing you. Maybe if you could try to disconnect your video.
Sorry, I did not hear you.
I think you have some connectivity issue. So if you switch off your video, it's going to be easier for us to listen, probably.
I cannot hear you, but okay. I think you're having a listening. Yeah, my connection is not good. I will then stop my video to see if it works better.
Okay, try it again now. I think it's back.
Hello? Do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Perfect.
I hear you cut off a little bit. Can you hear me now? Very well.
Yes, Sally, it's fine now. Please proceed.
Okay, should I start from the beginning?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Okay, so I was saying that first of all, I wanted to start talking about the procurement brief and clear to other public organizations. The IAE follows the procurement principles for fairness and effective competition. This is reflected throughout each stage of our procurement process and in our procurement framework. The aim is to achieve best value for money, pursuit of systematic goals. That is what we call the principle of best.
Sorry to interrupt you, Sally. Sally, your voice is not good. Could you try to disconnect only the audios and connect again quickly? In the audio and video menu on the top, press switch audio, disconnect, then connect. On the top, audio and video, switch audio, disconnect. Okay.
I did that. Now, do you hear me?
Yes, it's very fine now.
So,
No, there is a distortion. I think it's a connectivity problem, sir.
I'm sorry about that technical issue.
Okay, we can try to proceed now.
Could you try again, Sally, a last time? Otherwise, we will, I think, move to the next section.
Yes, Sally, please continue.
Okay, Hussein, I would suggest while Sally is trying to figure out maybe a better connectivity, could we go directly to the slide number 14, which is basically the first slide from Malaysia, from Dr. Paiza.
Okay.
But Vincent, you don't hear me? You don't hear me yet?
Sally, I don't hear you. I suggest for you to disconnect completely from this session and connect again. In the meanwhile, we'll proceed with the other slides.
Okay, thank you, and apologies.
No worries. Good morning, Dr. Paiza.
Dr. Paiza, I think, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Vincent. Can you hear me?
Yes, okay, your voice is a little bit deep. Can you please, do you have a headset? Please put a headset if you have. Your voice is very deep. Or come closer to the microphone.
Hello, Mr. Can you hear me?
It's perfect now. Yeah, it's perfect now. The floor is yours, Dr. Faiza. The floor is yours.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, you can start, Dr. Faiza. You can start.
Hello.
We can hear you.
Okay. Good morning. Good afternoon, everybody. It's great to see you all here, and thank you for joining the webinar. My name is Nofaida. Over the past 10 months, role as an LO in Malaysia Nuclear Agency, I am here to share that during the pandemic in Malaysia. So we talk about procurement process responsibilities and shares Malaysian experience. The main responsibility in the process are the first responsibility, and it also should ensure the accuracy of data in the document. For example, purchase order. So that we should review every purchase and ensure the details of the counterpart. For example, the name, address, email, and phone number are correct. This is important to ensure the counterpart receives the purchase order and other documents. If any issue are found or changed, NLO should contact IEA and immediately update the correct information. The second responsibility is that NLO should ensure the counterpart understand to the TC policies and procedures throughout the procurement process. So in this case, NLO should advise the counterpart to review every purchase order and understand the instructions in the purchase order. And also to ensure the counterpart obtain the tax exemption and provide the IEA track forwarder with any information or document as required. In some member states, the counterpart will coordinate with UNDP to obtain the tax exemption. So, next slide, please. Okay, and next, when everything is in place, ensure the counterpart proceed the shipments to a foreign forwarder. And also remind counterpart to arrange a collection of goods from the relevant terminal for deliverable terminal or DAT shipments. Any delay will cause storage charges for counterpart. And also need to inform counterpart to contact supplier to arrange installation or training if applicable. And the third and the final NLO responsibilities is should provide support to facilitate implementation and solve problems. So in this, if any issues, the NLO should counterpart to take photograph of packaging, goods, labels, and provide the information to the IEA and supplier immediately. So in this case, do not delay. And I think in conclusion, the NLO plays important role in managing coordination within the country to ensure the smooth implementation of the procurement process. I think with that, I end my presentation, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Faiza. It was very, very interesting from your perspective. I will suggest now that Sally is back to go back to the first slide, Hussein, that she was supposed to present, and we will give it another try. Sally, can you try again, please?
Do you hear me now?
Yes, perfectly.
Very good. Apologies for that. That's the world today. Okay, so I was talking here in this slide about the principles of procurement applicable to the RAEA, and they are very common in the public sector. So these principles are interlinked, and you will hear us mentioning them today and during your procurement interactions with the agency. And I am sure you're very familiar because you also come from the public entities, as I said. But let me just briefly highlight some of the main elements that you will hear often working with us in procurement in the agency. The principle of fairness and effective competition entail that all bidders shall have the same opportunities. Therefore, this means that the bidders have to be treated equally with no preferential treatment. On the other hand, the principle of integrity that you see here essentially means reliability, the following of the due process, and confidentiality. And again, this you may hear in certain particular procurements about the importance of confidentiality. And basically, this is because if we share information which is not publicly available, then this may cause, for example, that a bidder may have a disadvantage, or on the other hand, an unfair advantage. It could also reflect upon the reputation and integrity of the organization. Next slide, please. Every public organization has an internal procurement framework. In the agency, this is laid down in our financial rules and procedures that regulate the procurement process to ensure that those general principles that I just mentioned are attained throughout the process. This is achieved by requiring open competition with neutral specifications. And again, you will hear that very often working with us, that we need to ensure neutral specification. And what does that mean? That means to have generic specifications that would allow a fair competition. More details on the development of a specification will be discussed later by my colleague James. By being transparent, fair, and efficient in this procurement, the IAEA promotes equal access to open competition to interested bidders. Of course, there might be requirements where there is a need for direct contracting with a single supplier, that is, without having to go through a competitive procedure. For example, due to the standardization of goods or existing services. Such exceptions must be justified and may be considered on a case-by-case basis. Next slide, please. Now that we have learned about the general principles and known about the IAEA procurement framework, how to this implement in practice? In this slide, I want to show you the different steps of the IAEA purchasing process. And again, similar to any other public entity, the IAEA follows certain logical and standard steps, which go, as you can see on the top, from planning, bidding, bids evaluation, supplier selection, implementation, and closure. Those steps may require different levels of input and engagement from you as counterparts and NLOs and NLAs, which we will be discussing in more details later in this seminar. And we already heard a little bit from Malaysia, which sharing their experience about that. Next slide, please. In this slide, I would like to provide you with a general overview of the main stakeholders in IAEA procurements for the Technical Cooperation Program. Here you can see the procurement process at its core. You see it in the middle. In the lower part, light green cell, I hope you can see it and read it, but you see there that we have the Office of Procurement Services. At the Office of Procurement Services, we lead the procurement process, but the input from and coordination with many other parties are essential. And this adds a level of complexity not seen, for example, in HQ procurements. Starting from the top, the dark green cell in this slide, we have you as the contract stakeholders. And then these stakeholders will coordinate with the IAEA Department of Technical Cooperation and with the IAEA technical departments. This discussion may include procurement components, as we learned earlier with Javier, in which case the Office of Procurement Services then is involved. That's why you see this revolving cycle, how it goes in the chain. At the operational level, this translates in the discussions among the counterpart, the end user from the countryside, and the IAEA program management officer, technical officer, and contracting officer. Later on, then, in the process, we would have the involvement of the IAEA suppliers. That's the next cell you see in gray, together with the global freight forwarders. Then we have also customs authorities, and in some countries, depending on the shipping requirements, we will have also the involvement of the United Nations Development Program, or UNDP. And we will be talking about this in more details later. Next slide, please. What we had learned now in the previous slides, and actually me working in procurement for the Technical Cooperation Program, is that these procurements is actually a dependent action with many stakeholders, and where each dependency actually impacts the effectiveness of the process and its timeline. And I have seen that from the starting of the procurement, meaning, as we saw before, from the planning to the closure. Therefore, I continue to highlight in any forum, and I want to take the opportunity again today, about the importance of coordination and effective communication. In my experience, that is in fact the key to a successful and timely procurement action. Next slide, please. Now, we have been discussing about the stages of the purchasing process and the main stakeholders. Now, how does this work in practical terms? In this slide, I want to show you, in a nutshell, a summary overview of the involvement of some of the main stakeholders in relation to each stage of the procurement process. In this slide, you can see in the different colors the different stages of the procurement, from planning to closure. And then at the same time, you have the main stakeholders. Here is just a high level. Of course, there are many. We have you as the counterpart, and we have the agency. Then we also have the global freight forwarder and supplier. As you can see here, in terms of the counterpart, your involvement is let's say, more intense during the planning, when you're developing your project, and then talking about the procurement component of that. And then it becomes even more relevant later on when we are in the implementation phase. And this is where you see the involvement in parallel of many other stakeholders. So basically, at the implementation stage, the counterpart, together with the agency and the suppliers, are keen to ensure a successful delivery. In conclusion, while there are logical, sequential steps in the procurement process, they do require parallel, proactive coordination among all the stakeholders we have been discussing until now. Only working all together is that we will be able to deliver the right goods and or services and at the right time to help in making a difference to member states and those benefiting from those donations. More details on your role and responsibility in each stage will be provided in the incoming slides. Now, I think I'm done with my part, and now we're going to jump to
Javier.
Thank
you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you too, and apologies again for the disruption.
Javier, over to you.
Thank you, Sally. As Sally mentioned, the first step in the procurement process is planning. The starting point is the identification of the procurement needs during the project design phase, in which also the PMO and the TO are actively involved. And if needed, also the procurement officers can be consulted at this stage regarding specific aspects of the procurement process. And the procurement inputs are then reflected in the project work plan with realistic cost estimate and schedule. For example, a procurement officer can assist on providing a realistic cost estimate based on prior purchases. Also remember that it is at this stage that counterparts inform authorities that if the project is approved by the agency, a 5% of national participation cost of NPCs will apply. And also the possibility of GCS or government cost sharing that can be coordinated with the country. That means that the country can, in certain type of procurement that they are high value, they can provide with a certain amount of financial contribution how to facilitate the procurement of this equipment. The authorities needs also to know that the cost for operation, maintenance, repair, and disposal of the equipment are to be absorbed by the institution. This is very important. The equipment normally comes with several or a year or a couple of years guarantee. This has to be agreed, of course, but the repair and disposal of the equipment afterwards will be a responsibility by the institution. Next slide, please. Just to the step of planning also include assessing the requirements of the equipment. This means that the counterpart needs to ensure all the requirements are clear to the agency in terms of voltage, language for manual, etc. Confirm that the regulatory requirements are met. In the case that the procurement involves radioactive sources or material, there is a need for regulatory licenses need to be obtained prior to the or simultaneously to the equipment, but it's fundamental for the successful delivery of the equipment. Ensure also that the site is ready or will be ready to receive and install the equipment and to train the staff. Also, advise the IEA of import restriction and custom clearance requirements. This is very important. This is why it needs to be a clear communication. So here at the agency and also with the country, there's a clarity of the shipping instructions for the specific member state. In my next slide, I will show you some examples. Having these instructions correct from the very beginning is very important, and any changes at a later stage will require several people involved, administrative costs that will definitely, in my experience, delay the process. So the earliest we have the clarity on these requirements, the better. Also, ensure means to retrieve goods from customs, any import tax or duties, the need for inland transport in certain costs, the operation of equipment. So this is an important role from the country. And also, sometimes it's the possibility to consider a local procurement. Depending on the type of procurement, there's the possibility to buy these goods locally. Obviously, when justify and agree with the agency, we can provide that. It will require it's a different process. Will require some pro forma invoices and other documents, but sometimes makes sense due to the value of the equipment and availability of suppliers in the country. Next slide, please. Well, as you can see here, for the cases that we are treating or discussing today, cases of Malaysia and Mongolia, which were so kind to help us in webinar, these are the specific requirements from these countries. As you can see, it's indicated end user requirements on the voltage, the language. Sometimes it can be in English and French in some cases. For example, in the case of Mongolia, there is also some notes made due to the local regulations of the IEA law straightforward. These kind of aspects, if they can agree beforehand, we will. It is very important that the country communicate these shipping instructions to the PMO or a specific procurement officer, or any contact that you have at the agency, the information program, can channel this information to the right person. Next slide, please. Yeah. So in my previous slide, I mentioned that the country needs to confirm or ensure that regulatory requirements are met, including the license for radioactive material. This is key. This is fundamental for the collaboration between the member state and the agency. Why? Because as per IEA resolution, for the agency to approve the procurement of equipment with radioactive sources, it is a requirement for countries to have an adequate radiation safety infrastructure for the management of radiation sources. It is not enough for a country to meet the regulatory requirements. It is also need to report it, to update the information in a specific system, which is the Radiation Safety Information Management System, RASIMS-2. RASIMS-2 is a platform where there are several indicators where the country must proactively input information and check against the international standards of the agency. This is a new platform, that's why it's RASIMS-2, similar to the first one, but the agency have provided and will provide training on the use of this platform in case there are some doubts. But some of, if not all of the RASIMS coordinators have received already training on this platform. And again, if there's any need for a training, specific training, I'm sure the agency will provide it, or the patient safety team will provide training soon. This should be understood as a precondition of the procurement of radiation sources, and it will not, the procurement will not be approved. That's why it's so important. If there is an inadequate radiation safety infrastructure, if there is no information in RASIMS-2, so it is very important to have the situation in the country, but as I mentioned before, to also have it reflected in the system. It can be, in some cases we find that we have situations where the country have the right infrastructure in place, but it's not reflected in the system, and we cannot proceed until the country has done so. Next slide, please. Okay, so this slide shows what some of the problems that we face and the member state face. So, for example, the site readiness. One of the major reasons of failure of certain equipment are actually when the facilities are not ready. This can happen due to poor planning or lack of coordination between stakeholders or wrong expectations. So it's very important at the planning stage, as discussed before, that all these matters are considered. In case of big procurement, like a radiotherapy machine, for example, sometimes bunkers are not built because require, budget in country, planning in country. Sometimes it takes some time to do so, and we face problems in delivering equipment today with the construction works, storage of the equipment. While when we cannot install it, there is some proper storage of the equipment, then the equipment is damaged by the environment, by dust. And also there is a situation when the equipment arrives, but the staff is not trained in their use. So it's very important, both the equipment component, but also the training of staff to use that equipment. And now I would like to invite the technical officer, James Casania, to share with us his experience during the procurement process.
Good morning, good day, everyone. Let me try the video. If it doesn't work, I turn it off. I wish all of you a better 2021. I'm a technical officer. As mentioned, I deal with food safety. My colleagues have discussed the planning. The planning is very critical when you're designing, but also when the project actually has been approved. It is very important that all of us conduct a needs assessment. Sometimes this may require the technical officer visiting the country, or if not, an expert may be sent there to help you assess your needs. And then we establish sometimes a wish list. If we don't come over there, you send us a wish list. What is it that you need according to the design? And then we draft the technical specifications working with you. Please note that there might be competitive bidding, especially like when you're procuring the large equipment, single large equipment. Are you buying an alpha spec, an ICPMS? But sometimes we consolidate those smaller items. For instance, you're procuring a centrifuge, an extraction equipment, sample extraction equipment, or consumables. We call that a lab consolidator. We have a lab consolidator here that we work with. It has been identified by my colleagues that the counterpart plays a critical role. Please note that this procurement is for you and you are the heartbeat of this procurement. We get it wrong for you, we have got it wrong completely. So everything that will be said or has been said, not that you are the end user, and at the end of the day, you must be happy and that it meets the needs of the project and the project will meet its goals. Obviously, we need to be very careful about who is the end user. Do they have the correct information? Sometimes we have to initiate a procurement in order to move with the name of a colleague of yours in the same institution. Now, that is very risky. So it's very important that you include the correct information and who has the role to play where in terms of goods and services. The TO will work with you obviously to prepare and review the different specifications of the statement of work to make sure that this is accurate. As is stated with my colleagues over before, we need to be fair, competitive. There are many benefits of that. When you are open and competitive, you might, I know I'm not supposed to deal with finances, but you might get a good deal and the resources still come back to you as the end user. Of course, we collaborate with you. And before we initiate the procurement process, we would have made sure that everything is okay, is tight. And depend on us as well. We depend on you, but listen to us, work with us, so that we can guide you based on previous experiences. Working with our colleagues like Sally, then we identify potential suppliers. These are usually suggestions. You suggest so and so can provide this service, because we even have some countries where supply can be a challenge. So you can provide us some suggestions as well. But at this point, then we have to be fair and minimize contact with the potential suppliers. Next slide, please. Now, I mentioned that if you're, for instance, procuring an alpha spec, an ICPMS, an LCMS, SMS, these are some of the things. This is a template that we use regularly. This is the template that we use for procuring that. And some of the things we'll look at will be the scope. What is it that we are using for? For instance, testing contaminants in the environment or in food. Sometimes we may abbreviate things, mention applicable document. It's not always the case, especially if it is. The document must be clear to whoever is going to compete. That's the bottom line. Be cleared so that they don't raise questions and they know what they will be providing. In this, we discuss functional and performance characteristics, for instance, to analyze toxic metals in food at this range and be robust enough and can run for a day without interruptions, something like that. The technical specifications, these are the essential ones that we'll be looking at, and I'll give you an example later. For instance, analyze X number of samples and detect at this level. the limit of detection. That is very, very critical. Other things that we look at are the marking, the packaging. How is it packaged so that it arrives in good shape? How is it marked so that you can easily see the quality criteria? One of the things that we emphasize, we don't want a refurbished equipment. We want them from the factory, and this must be demonstrated. And obviously, it's incumbent upon the supplier to ensure that this is tested and acceptable, and they can share a document always with us on this issue. Installation and training are very, very critical. We use sometimes between 2 days, depending on the equipment. But roughly it's 5 working days, and we recommend at least you have more than 4 people, if you can, that can be trained. This is very good. This is an equipment, but this is also very critical for human resource development. There's a lot of human resource in the installation and the training. But they mentioned readiness. The readiness does not mean just the site alone, but what are the consumables that are required? Because if the site is ready and the methanol is not there, the argon gas is not there, and the installation will be a problem. So these are some of the things that we always need to prepare for. Another thing that we particularly pay attention to is the service. Is there support in the country? We pay particular attention to that, and we encourage the competitors to think about that, that they take care of the country. Of course, my colleague has mentioned the issue of maintenance of the equipment. Keep that in mind for sustainability. Are you looking at a warranty? Plan for that so that you have a critical role to play. Next slide, please. Just an example of a radioreceptor assay, an equipment that will measure tritium and carbon level activity, for instance, in food. Very clear, you have stated it. And then you need to emphasize, for instance, the electrical conditions in your country. Some work in the domains of 100 to 120 volts, others 220. This needs to be very clear. Another thing usually we add in is a UPS for those who have issues with electricity and all that. My colleague mentioned communication. This is very, very critical. You need to be vigilant as a counterpart. Please, and communicate. Keep the technical officer in the loop. One of your closest allies in the project is the technical officer, because it is that project that you work with him. I have an example where we procured an instrument for one of the member states. An installation was guaranteed, but because of lack of communication, they missed out on a training because the supplier came, installed, trained for a few days and left. Remember, the installation is for X number of days, and then after installation is the application training for up to 5 days. Now, if you end up signing the certificate with a company that the installation is done and you're being trained, it will be very difficult for us. So we had to chase the supplier and later on to go back to the country, and then COVID came in. So please keep us in the loop all the time. Next slide, please. Fine. Once we have done the specific, now to add on, there's a template we have. It's an Excel sheet, simple. If we are buying several materials, small equipment, and consumables, for instance, it's an Excel sheet we share with you. You specify the compound, the item, how much you want, an estimate, potential source, and all that, and we work together with you. After we worked on that, then it's obviously the competitive bidding time. That is, if you wish, more sensitive, more within now. We hand over to the contracting officer who goes out to the market and conducts the competitive bidding. Obviously, we provide support during the process, but this is an area where then you need to stay away from the bidders so that you're not biased. Remember, the bidders want to sell, and they will market it in so many ways. And they are closer to you. They are far away from us, but they are closer to you. And sometimes they provide you some training and all that. That relationship is good, but when we open it up, it's better. And it's very important that we avoid situations where the technical specification may be revised I think there's a wording there where there's a star that I missed leading to withdrawal of the technical specification. We want to avoid that at all costs. Next slide, please. And once the bidding is done, and hopefully we have done a good job, we wrote specifications that are open enough, we attract many people to come, and then we have received offers, evaluation goes on. The technical officer that you work with is in charge of this. Of course, this is the person you need to establish closer relationship, of course, with everyone else, but the closer you are to your TO, the more successful you are, and the happier probably you'll be. This may require one technical officer, but in some cases, multiple or two technical officers may be involved. But remember, it's your technical officer assigned to your project that is responsible for this. Once evaluation has been done, this is handed over to the colleague in procurement, and then he or she conducts the commercial evaluation. Sometimes technical clarification may be required. Again, if you have worked closely with your TO, you will not be disturbed, but sometimes you may be called upon to provide an input. But again, trust your TO. If your input is needed, you'll be contacted. I think this is my last slide, and I would like to hand over to my colleague Sally for additional information. Sally, over to you.
James, do you hear me well now? Or do you still hear me well? Okay, yes. Good. Thank you. As James was saying, following the technical evaluation of the offers received following the competitive bidding, in these 4 steps of award, we have that these offers which are confirmed, technically compliant, and then reviewed by the contracting officer to determine which one or which ones would represent best value for money. This determination is basically made on the award criteria that were established during the planning phase of the procurement, and then were communicated also in the market. For example, for you to understand what that means, the most common criteria that we use is the lowest price technically compliant offer. So based on that, then we will proceed with the award. Following an internal award approval within the agency, depending on the complexity, depending on the amount, then an agreement, contract, or purchase order is issued to one or more suppliers representing best value for money. However, I have to mention that, and maybe you have noticed if you have worked with us before, is that the most common contracting instrument that the agency uses is a purchase order. When we issue a purchase order, automatically all the relevant stakeholders will receive a copy of that purchase order. And this includes, of course, you as a user, counterpart, NLO, and NLA. And it will be either for implementation or information as applicable. And the purpose of that is what I discussed earlier, to ensure communication among all the relevant stakeholders, and they know, therefore, that the purchase order has been issued and follow the relevant next steps. During this phase, then you as a counterpart and the end user shall then confirm the site readiness, so to see whether the site is ready to receive that particular equipment. Also, you need to confirm the logistic arrangements that may be needed. Javier mentioned some of them, so to make sure that you, now knowing that the purchase order has been issued, you can potentially initiate those logistic arrangements through time delivery. At the same time, from the side of the purchase order, we want you to please review them, make sure that the information is complete, accurate, and I'm going to be talking more details on that in the next slides. Then also, in case that you find any issues, you should contact us as soon as you see that the purchase order has any discrepancies. And again, we will go into more details in the next slides. Now, if sometimes we conclude contracts as well, and sometimes it might be what we call a tripartite contract. That means that you, as an end user, will be part of the contractual relationship with the supplier. in which case we also ask you to sign the contract, following, of course, your own internal review and agreement of that is then communicated and discussed at the time of planning as well. Now, in the next slide please. In this slide, I want to show you a snapshot of a sample purchase order and show you the most relevant information and where to find it. And this is really very hands-on because I sometimes receive queries from some end users asking, well, where is this information? What should I do? And so on. So I think I want to start with something that seems to be very basic and simple. That is on the top here in this slide in the red box, you can see the purchase order number. That number is the most important thing when we are implementing, because we would like you to please make reference to that purchase order number in any communication related to that particular procurement. And that is because, for example, just to give you an idea, in 2020, the Office of Procurement Services at the agency issued almost 4,000 purchase orders under the Technical Cooperation Program alone. So if you send us a communication that does not mention the purchase order, it will be very difficult for us to react quick and ensure that your item is attended to as soon as possible based on that reference number. So please treasure that number. Now, on the below part, there's a date, but that's only the date of the purchase order, so it's not relevant for you really. Then on the left side of the slide, you can see the supplier name and contact details. Again, very important, not only during implementation. James and Javier also mentioned before that you may have some issues, warranty, etc. in the future. So even after the purchase order has been closed, so it is important that you know that you still have that contact information reflected in the purchase order that you will be receiving. Then on the right side here, you have you can see two boxes in green and blue. The first one is the consignee, and the second one is related to the ship-to address. So where the equipment will ultimately be, that is the end user information. I think Javier also mentioned earlier the importance of receiving during the planning stage, when you're discussing with the program management officer and the technical officer on the project, that you send us early enough this information. This is important to maintain it as accurate and as updated as possible. I have seen delays caused because the information, for example, of the end user was not complete. It was somebody else. You can see or in the lower part that we have also the contact information and the persons who will be liaising and coordinating during the implementation. If a person left the institute or the hospital or the laboratory, then there will be no reaction or no action, so to say, from the end user side. So this information is really, really important. So please, in case of any changes, even if it is during the implementation, that we need to inform, because as we saw in the slide about the stakeholders and before, the communication and coordination during the implementation with the IAEA Global Freight Forward is important, but also for the supplier here, because they will be preparing the export documentation that would help the import to your country. So if there is a change, then the documentation needs to be changed. And again, I have seen, unfortunately, many cases where this is happening, and this causes a lot of delays. So please check as soon as you receive the purchase order that this information is complete as well. For example, in a case, I remember that only because there was a mistake in the address, the Global Freight Forward couldn't finalize the shipping documentation for import. So you see, it seems very simple thing, but it's actually very crucial to ensure timely delivery. Now, in the part of the consignee, that will be the institute that would help us with the import of the goods. basically, and in most of the country, we have the United Nations Development Program, as I mentioned before, that would help us together with you to get the tax exemption certificate for the import of the goods into your country. Next slide, please. Then in the lower part of the purchase order, or actually would be kind of in the middle of that cover, you will have a very important piece of information. Here you can see it on the top right in an orange box, which is the date of delivery. And here I want to dive in a little bit because I receive queries sometimes from the end users or even from the permanent missions trying to understand why the goods have not been received beyond that date. This date is actually for the supplier. As you know, this purchase order is issued to the bidder that won the process. So it is when the supplier finishes its delivery obligations. In this case, or let's say in most of the cases for the technical cooperation procurements, this date would mean the date that the goods are ready at the premises of the supplier for collection by the IAEA Global Freight Forwarder. So in that case, they will kind of finish their obligation in terms that the goods are ready, they can be picked up, and initiate then the import procedures. That means that this date, in fact, relates to that date and not when the goods will be in the country. That date of when the goods will arrive in your country will be dependent on the length of the process for importation, meaning that as soon as the goods are notified, ready for collection by the supplier, the Global Freight Forwarder will start processing the documentation for import, looking into the booking of the shipment, either by sea freight or by air, depending on the goods and mode of shipment agree, and so on. And then, of course, the Global Freight Forwarder would need to wait and coordinate with you, with UNDP, and wait for what we call the green light. The green light is the confirmation that all the requirements needed for the import of the goods are completed, documentation is done, and the goods can be then transported from the Global Freight Forwarder facility, because if they collected the goods from the supplier, they will keep it until the goods then are ready for import in the country. Then, based on that, as soon as this green light is given by you, and then you also confirm that the site is ready, everything is done, basically from your side, and then the Global Freight Forwarder would initiate the shipment, arrange it, and then, of course, will proceed with the custom clearance once in the country. As we heard from Javier, that means that you're ready also with the logistic arrangements to collect the goods from customs. So the Global Freight Forwarder will hand it over to you, and then you will transfer it to the end user facilities. Now, moving on this part of the purchase order, you can also see another important information in this slide. You will see it on the left side. This brown box. It is the name and email address of the IEA contracting officer in charge of this procurement. This, together with your purchase order number, is very important in case of any issues, again, even if it relates to warranty, and we will talk in more details later on that as well. So this is your key point of entry, so to say, for the communication with the Office of Procurement Services. Next slide, please. Now, in this last part of the purchase order, or the cover of the purchase order, you will find also the list of items that are being procured, together with the quantity that is issued to the supplier. Again, please check this information thoroughly to confirm that this matches your requirements as well. It could be that, for example, the quantities, we can have a human error, that there's an error, it should have been 2 units, not 1, or maybe for whatever reason we were only able to purchase 1 or a different amount, and please reach out to us in case that you find any discrepancies. Then after that, you will find what we call the purchase orders instructions. And these are for the different stakeholders required for the implementation of that particular purchase order. That would include, first of all, instructions to the supplier, so specifying what they need to do. And here will come these famous shipping instructions that I mentioned and Javier mentioned, that comes from you, telling us what is your requirement for that shipment, and we will then instruct the supplier to meet those requirements in terms either of the equipment or also in terms of the import to your country, the documentation that is needed. For example, in some countries require a certificate of origin, some others don't. Others also require a certificate of conformance of the goods, so the supplier would need to obtain that certification as well in order to ensure that the goods are timely ready for export. So that's why it is important, again, I need to highlight it once again, that you communicate with us at the planning stage, but also when we issue the purchase order to confirm in good time that this is still accurate. If there are any updates to that, to those shipping instructions, no matter which stage, please let us know at the soonest. Because, for example, we saw last year with the pandemic how fast these things were changing. We were having issues in delivering some of the detection equipment and consumables for COVID, for the detection of COVID. And because the standard instructions, of course, in some countries did not apply. There were some restrictions due to the pandemic and so on, and we needed to change these instructions very quickly. But I have also seen it in standard operations, in the standard purchase orders before and now after the pandemic as well, that we have those changes and impact and delay greatly. So please communicate to us any such changes as soon as you become aware of them. Then there is also a section with instructions to the global freight forwarder, and this is very important for you also. This is an important tip, because in that section you will find the name of the global freight forwarder that has been appointed to deal with your shipment. At the moment, the most commonly used is Bolloré, so we are all familiar with that. And also the points of contact of the global freight forwarder that you will need in order to start liaising all of these arrangements. And finally, you will also find information on how to track your shipment. There will be a link that will be provided by the global freight forwarder as soon as they get the purchase order. You will receive what they call a notice, and you will receive that notice with that link, and there you can track the shipment when it is initiated. When the purchase order is issued, you receive the first notice from the global freight forwarder. It would basically say, if you go to that link, it will simply say goods not ready, because still maybe the lead time for the supplier to have the goods ready is still running. But as soon as the goods are ready and the process is starting in terms of the importation requirements, then you will see there the updates. And also while in transit, they need to provide that update. But again, if for whatever reason you missed that email or the contact detail of the person in charge changed, so there's a new person in charge at the time of the implementation from the side of the end user, not a problem. With the purchase order number, again, an important thing to treasure, that purchase order number, you can go to the platform of the global freight forwarder and look for that purchase order to see what is the status of that shipment. And these instructions are, again, provided here in the purchase order. So I want to just finalize saying and highlighting again the importance of you acquainting yourself with the instructions in the purchase order, keeping us updated of any changes of any of these instructions or in your contact details that are reflected in the purchase order as early as possible. So basically, even if before we issue the purchase order, if there's any updates, before we issue it so that we can issue it with the correct information, it will be appreciated. Well, with that, I think now I will hand over to Javier. Thank you.
Once the purchase order is issued or the contract is signed, the supplier starts with the implementation. This means that during this phase, the IEA supplier, the one that was chosen after the process, manufactures and prepares the goods for shipment. If applicable, performs the testing of the equipment. In some cases, also directly arrange shipment and delivery of goods. And in some cases, also perform services such as installation and training on the installation of the equipment, of the operation of the equipment. Also, the IEA Global Freight Forwarder coordinates the pickup, shipment, custom clearance, and hands over the goods to the counterpart or the end user. This step triggers the payment to the supplier for the equipment collected, and not for the services that are still to be rendered, such as the installation or training. Sometimes that also during this COVID, what happened was that the equipment was delivered, but the installation or maybe the training has to be a bit postponed or doing virtually. So it depends. So we try to separate these two components. Next slide, please. So during this phase, the end users, this is the role, coordinate with UNDP and relevant authorities to obtain the tax exemption or import permits, and liaise with the global freight forwarder to send these documents. Also, the end user has to confirm the site readiness and provide the green light to the global freight forwarder to initiate shipment. As Sally mentioned, it's very important, this concept of green light, which suppose that all the conditions are fixed to receive the equipment. Also, the end user can and should follow up with the global freight forwarder or supplier the shipment status. As also Sally mentioned, it can be done through the website and also with the PMO or the procurement officer indicated in the purchase order. Also, the end user needs to remain available to support the process because they are in the country, because there might be some aspects that have to be considered during the process of delivery that were not foreseen at the beginning. So it's very important the end user has an active role. And finally, arrange collection of goods from customs and inland delivery to the specific site in case there's a longer, for example, longer inland transfer, need to be coordinated and covered by the end user. Next slide, please. The counterpart also needs to immediately arrange the collection of goods from customs. This is very important because if the equipment arrives to the country and the counterpart is not ready to pick up, the storage cost might incur. This is the reason of the green light. Just to give a heads up, everything is ready. Please give us the green light. So no storage costs are incurred by the So, and even if there are long delays, we have examples in the past where the goods were lost. So it's very important that this is handled proactively. So remember, as stipulated in the revised supplementary agreement that I mentioned earlier, the Incoterms of the process follow that delivery at terminal. So that means that end user collects from the airport after the clearance. The end user, the IEA Global Freight Forwarder or another agent to collect on their behalf at their cost. And once collected, the counterpart can arrange inland delivery to the site. You know the related charges. and can contact and should contact the supplier to arrange installation and training. Once the equipment is in the site, then it can be arranged the installation and training. And normally it should be, my experience also it can change, but 5 days or 10 days, the company will send their technician to install and train the staff on the first step in the use of the equipment. Here's a good point where we can hear the experience of one of our NLAs from Tuya. If you don't mind, just please take it.
Okay.
Yeah, we hear you.
Yeah. Good day for everyone. I wish to all of you to stay healthy and safe in this not very easy period. And I'm glad to share with you today our experience on custom clearance and package launching. Thank you for giving us this opportunity. I would like to start with when the day is indicated in purchase order as continued and is supposed to organize custom clearance and package.
Tuya, excuse me, just a second. Could you try to speak a bit louder or closer to the microphone?
It's better now?
Yes, it's a bit better. Yes, thank you.
I'm sorry. Technical issue. Yes. When the day is indicated in purchase order as continuing, and NLO office is requested to organize custom clearance and package exchange procedures.
Yes, please.
Yes. Should I start?
Yes, please go ahead. That's fine.
As I said, when the day is indicated in purchase order as continuing, and NLO office is requested to organize custom clearance and package exemptions together with counterpart and user. In fact, the process could be a little bit different. It depends which is what is the items ordered and equipment. It's medical or not medical equipment. The counterpart end user has to arrange custom clearance and package exemption for all equipment production. It is the custom regulation for Mongolia. Counterpart end user has to receive in advance all documents and information required to arrange custom clearance procedure and package exemption. Because it's very long procedure, sometimes it could take more than 3 weeks and more than. And 5 state organizations are involved in this procedure. Each state organization has to deliver an official document. And NLO office is one of those organizations and initiate the this process and coordinate all process follow-up, etc. Cost of services for delivery of shipment from airport cargo terminal. The final point are covered by counterpart. And then also checks how the shipment was delivered and how it was installed, and the request from counterpart end users report. Thank you very much.
Hello, Vincent. Good afternoon.
Mr. Kamaruddin, yes, please go ahead. You have number 4.
Okay. This is an example from Malaysia, how we get the tax exemption, custom clearance, and delivery. So once we receive the notification from the IEA that the goods are now available from the supplier and are ready for export, attached with PO and also pro forma invoice and also the list of items. So the global forwarders, Bolloré from Vienna, make an arrangement with domestic courier shipper to receive the item, the first step. And what is the responsible of the counterpart? Counterpart prepare the tax exemption letter signed and approved by the director of Nuclear Malaysia, in this case Nuclear Malaysia, and also attached with all the document requirements, for example, the PO, pro forma invoice, and also the list of items. And the second responsible of the counterpart is cooperate with the domestic courier shipper and provide all the goods and information required to arrange custom clearance and tax exemption, meaning that all the custom clearance and tax exemption will managed by the local shipper and courier. If the procurement items is radiation equipment, so the counterpart shall get the approval letter from our regulatory body. In this case, we have Atomic Energy Licensing Board, Malaysian. Okay, the next slide, please. Okay, once the tax exemption documentation is approved and ready, the domestic courier shipper inform the global forwarders by emails that the custom is ready to receive the shipment and items, meaning that the green light from the local custom already received, and the Bolloré or the forwarders we can send the items. Okay. In Malaysia, services, insurance, and based on our experience, services, insurance, and delivery charge of shipment from airport cargo to terminal to the counterpart or end user organization already covered by the IEA in the PO. This is based on the previous experience. But now I think the regulation will change. I don't know. Okay. The counterpart, once we receive the items, the counterpart inspect the goods item immediately upon arrival and notify the forwarders if the items incomplete, damaged, or not function accordingly. And then the counterpart also complete the justification procurement form to declare permission of the receiving gift from third party, in this case from IEA, and send to our Minister of Science and Technology and Innovation. Because once the permission of the receiving gifts documentation is approved and ready to the counterpart consignee, must register the goods item as a government asset. I think that's all example from Malaysia. Over to you, Vincent. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kamaluddin. Sally, I will let you now present a few slides on UNDP involvement in this process. Thank you, Sally.
And thanks to Malaysia, Mongolia for sharing these previous examples. And I think it's very important to see how the import requirements and shipping instructions differ from country to country. In some countries, as we see, Malaysia, and the UNDP may not necessarily be involved, and in Mongolia they may be involved, and again it would depend on each country. Having said that, in the cases where UNDP is involved, then they will be reflected in the purchase order, and there will be some instructions in the purchase orders for them as well to support you with the customs documentation, and if needed, with the tax exemption as well. So in this case, we have received some example information from Bangladesh. So the UNDP office in Bangladesh. Basically, they execute these services based on a common services agreement that we have among the different organizations. They also help us with that based on the fact that we have also sometimes bilateral agreements with the UNDP offices, and then therefore they also provide these services to us. If they are involved, then here in the case of Bangladesh, you will see different checks that they carried out once they receive the purchase order and that need confirmation from the relevant party, be it our supplier, the agency, or you in the country as the end user. Next slide, please. This is a continuation of those checks, and I think it's important that you go through this as an example of the questions that you may expect or us at the agency from UNDP to ensure that they process the documentation in a timely manner. For example, they ask who is responsible for the insurance. Is the insurance in place, for example, for the transfer at the local level? Who is responsible for documentation, etc. In this case, for example, in the case of documentation, it may be dependent on what documentation is required for the import of the particular goods. It could be a document required from the counterpart. It could be information from the supplier or that the global freight forwarder needs to process. So again, the important thing is communication and clarity in terms of what those requirements are to ensure that the relevant stakeholder takes ownership of that action and provide the relevant documentation or information in a timely manner. Next slide, please. Here we would like to highlight some of the challenges that UNDP sometimes faces during their services of supporting our donation process. For example, sometimes depending on the offices where the UNDP is located, there could be changes in the government policy. This goes in line with what I mentioned before, that sometimes the import requirements change, and we need to know in advance, as well as UNDP. So sometimes they are used to certain process to help you at the local level, but it might be that depending on the goods, could be a different process, or that the policy at the country level has changed. Also, it could be a change in the UN policy in terms of, for example, from our end in the agency, that we change certain procedures that could happen, or as a whole, as part of the UNDP policy for implementing this type of services. Then here we want to highlight some examples of things that, let's say, as lessons learned. And one of them is, for example, the absence of relevant information. Also, the non-responsiveness from relevant stakeholders, or last-minute information that was not expected and then may cause a change and a delay in the process. So in conclusion, in here, what we see again is the importance of coordinating, and as soon as you know about any changes, please communicate. If UNDP is involved, also reach out to them early in the process to identify what the requirements are, what do they need from you, and act proactively in all of these discussions to ensure timely delivery. Next. I think now I give it back to Javier. Thank you.
Well, now in step 7 of acceptance, when receiving a shipment, there are several procedures, or there is a procedure to follow. The first step is check the packaging for sign of damage. Obviously, it might be damage during the transport, so it's very important to check visually the sign of damage and ensure that the labels match the order. Secondly, if supplier will come to install or is included the installation, keep the parcel sealed and store safely in place where they cannot get water or dust or any away from any potential danger that they, can damage the parcel. Then contact the supplier to arrange the installation and refer to the IAPO purchase order number, as Sally mentioned. It's very important for us at the agency, but also for all the stakeholders. So we have a common language, which is the PO number. So when you initiate this communication, copy the IEA to inform us, and just in case we need to follow up in any and confirm that everything required is available. Secondly, if no installation is ordered, open the packaging immediately and compare the contents to the purchase order and packaging. Also, we have several cases, not many, but in some instances that the contents of the parcel does not match with what is the packing list or the purchase order. So it's not something routinary, so you please take care and pay attention to these details when the equipment arrives. Next slide, please. Okay, so after receiving the shipment, end users are asked to confirm the receipt of the goods. If you are the authorized person, because sometimes the end user or the contact is the head of the department or head institution, so it needs to be that an authorized person fill in the relevant part of the form, including feedback about delivery, performance of the supplier, and signature block. So name, position, date, place, signature or stamp, depending on how you do. End users' feedback on supplier performance help us at the agency and help other member states because we are able to manage the suppliers based on their delivery or their delivery of services, and in turn ensure improved implementation of the program, yours and also other member states. As I mentioned. Next slide, please. So, in case of any issue with the goods or service that have been delivered, or of any warranty claims, please, you should contact the supplier and the IEA contracted officer immediately, explaining first the shortcomings, problems, failures, damages of equipment, for example, or reason, any reason for the lack of satisfaction installation or training, for example. Provide a detailed list of items missing per the purchase order or packing list. That's what I mentioned. It's important to check it when you first open the parcel. Include photos of packaging, damage or goods, or anything to the goods, labels to illustrate the damage, obviously if applicable. And when you contact them, please always quote again the PO number, the purchase order, which is the common language between all. And obviously do this immediately because in some cases the warranty is for certain period of time, and any delay on notifying any problem, then it will allow the time to pass, and eventually we can get to a position where the guarantee is not valid anymore. So it's very important to have or to put this into a priority. Next slide, please. So now here you can see an example of how a proof of delivery form looks like, and also the certificate of completion of services. As you can see, the information is pretty straightforward and can be easily answered by any authorized person in your institution. And again, here PMO and procurement officer at the agency might be able to assist in case you need. Please, I think next slide. Now we can sign.
Thank you, Javier. And I think here is basically to summarize what to do in case that shipment is received with damaged goods or incomplete equipment. In the proof of delivery, you would see that you are required to confirm which goods were received and in which condition. So this, please fill in the proof of delivery, and in there you can also indicate in the case of missing items or damaged equipment. In the event that you see that even the package is broken or something, take the picture before you open it as well. If you see that the package is already with some broken parts or holes, or for example, the pallet is out of place, so it's not put together properly, etc. Take the picture before you open it. Then you can inspect the goods and confirm whether they are all in there, as Javier was saying, but also whether they are without any damage. If they are with the damage, then again, take a picture and try kind of filling a kind of a protocol of the findings, meaning you saw the damage in the package, you then proceeded to open it and found that 3 of the 10 items, for example, were damaged. And then provide that information to the agency, and this is very important because then we will initiate our claim for insurance and then see how we can then replace those items for you. So, but we need to know exactly the quantity, the condition of those items, and then we will try to find a solution as soon as possible, while at the same time coordinating with our insurance company. We may need you to ask, for example, also our global freight forwarder for information. Sometimes we have seen that, in fact, the damage was caused during the custom clearance. So while the goods were either waiting for the customs, so it was something that happened at the time that also the customs were opening the package. That, for example, they were trying to carry it for inspection and then it fell or something. So there could be many reasons why this happened. But regardless, any information that you have, please put it in the protocol with the pictures, and then we will try to figure it out with our supplier, with our global freight forwarder, with insurance. From your end, the important thing is to let us know, because then we can, as I said, initiate the replacement. So now back to you, Vincent.
Thank you, Sally. Just before we move to the next slide, I would like to ask if Mongolia or Malaysia would have any specific comments on this specific topic, on receiving damaged, incomplete equipment, if you have examples or things you would like to add.
To say just one thing, please. Sometimes the checking process can take, I don't know, 1 more or more than time. So custom clearance processes can take, I don't know, 3 weeks, and after end users could not install just after they receive it, because they have some internal rules to install some equipment received by them under the IDEA project. So I would say we can say we have some problems with the equipment, because now 1 month after it's over sometimes.
Thank you, Tuya. So next slide, please, Hussein. So now, before we are almost finishing this presentation, but before presenting you the last slides, we would like you attendees to go through this quiz. So you will see close to the chat box on WebEx a quiz appearing, a polling. So you will have a 1 minute limit to answer this question. So the IAEA, through the global freight forwarder, covers shipping costs related to the transport of the goods to the airport or seaport, customs clearance, and or the transport of the goods from the airport or seaport to the recipient institute. So Hussein will now let the countdown. So you're going to have 1 minute from now to answer, to click one or more of the answers that you have here. Okay, I think the time is out. Hussein, could we have the next slide and the results of the polling, please? Okay, so here the right answers were basically that the IAEA, through the global freight forwarder, is covering the shipping costs related to the transport of the goods to the airport or seaport, and basically to the customs clearance. We will clarify some more on the Malaysian case in the Q&A. Hussein, could you please go to the next slide? Thank you. I will now hand over to Javier for the end of this presentation before going to the Q&A.
This title of this presentation is very important. The right equipment delivered at the right time. So it's very important to ensure that all stakeholders understand their roles and responsibilities through all the steps. So a successful story is a one that we have the right equipment at the right time. So in consideration, for example, having clear understanding of the requirement of the equipment and accurate specification, site readiness, documentation ready, and coordination among all stakeholders and communication in case there are certain issues during the process that they are not clear. I would like to tell you to use this presentation in the coming month for any procurement that you might be involved, because it can show you some examples on some important information that can help. Next slide, please. So, excuse me. All these forms related to the procurement process are available in the PCMF reference desk, and that you can access it online. And I think it's very important that you search the PCMF website and this reference desk for this information. And again, in case any doubt arise, the PMO and the procurement officer, contact that you have here at the agency, might be able to tell you, and will be ready to help. Next slide, please.
Thank you very much, Javier. Thank you again to all of the presenters. We're now going to have a few minutes to go through these Q&A sessions. I think Hussein had gathered the few questions that we received. I will start with a clarification on what was said. It was basically mentioned by the Malaysian panelist. I think this was Mr. Kamarudin, who mentioned that the service charges and delivery costs from the airport terminal to the counterpart organization were also covered by the IAEA support. and which is slightly different to what we saw from the quiz and also according to Sally's description. Could you please, presenters, clarify this specific point?
I just start, if I may, Vincent?
Sure.
I should say that there are some exceptions by which we do make delivery at place to the counterpart. And this relates mostly to radioactive material. So, or some type of dangerous goods that for the nature of it, then we ask the supplier, or in this case, sometimes the global freight forwarder. I should have mentioned actually that we have the two possibilities. Most of the time it's done by our global freight forwarder, but sometimes because of this, the nature of the goods, we ask the supplier to do the delivery themselves. And then in those cases, like I mentioned, for example, for radioactive sources and things like that, then they would deliver directly to the end user. Again, it's on a case-by-case basis and depending on the goods being procured. Over. I hope it clarifies. I don't know if my other colleagues would like to add something else.
Would someone else? Yeah, Javier?
Yes. Yes, thank you, Vincent. Yes, so also it's very important that in these cases you communicate. If you have any doubt in a specific procurement, you can communicate to the procurement officer that you can see in the purchase order and also a PMO. But you know, normally actually the counterpart will have to address or to cover this cost. But in case of doubt, please contact us and we'll be able to clarify.
Thank you, Javier. Hussein, could we move to the next question, please? So here is the question. The procurement process, is the procurement process the same for national TC projects compared to regional and interregional TC projects? Here, maybe we can start with Sally once again.
Yes, thank you, Vincent. And the answer is yes. It's the same procurement process. The difference sometimes might be only the procurement strategy applied to a particular procurement action, again, depending on the nature of the goods being procured.
If I may, Vincent?
Sure.
Yes. So the process itself is the same as Sally mentioned, and what it changed could be also from the project management point of view, is that the national project are managed or are just basically with one counterpart in many cases, but basically one counterpart. So the value of the procurement can be higher depending on what is the design of the project. While in the regional and interregional projects, normally the project has 10, 15 counterparts or even more. So the value of procurement and the type of procurement can be different than from the national. But basically the process is the same, but the project management or the type of equipment may be different. Thank you.
Thank you, Javier. Could we move to the next question, please? So this is a question about the Racines platform and the attached information on safety. I think this is again a yes/no question. For emergency-related project, I assume the system to be updated by the member states is the EPRINS system. Is that correct? Well, I think I can take this one. Yes, I think this is correct. This goes together with the safety information provided by the member state. Do someone else from the IAEA want to comment or add something on that? Good. So I think we can move to the next question, please, Hussein. Is it really possible to procure consumables and equipment in the country of the NPC? Is there any difference of requirement to be fulfilled by local suppliers? Maybe here, someone from procurement, I would say Sally.
Thank you, Vincent. And here the requirements to be fulfilled by local suppliers will be more or less the same. We have general requirements for suppliers, so the only difference will be, of course, the technical requirements of what those items at the local level are. For example, I have seen in the difference between local and international procurement, for example, in terms of quality requirements and certification, etc. But this is something to be discussed with the technical officer in terms of the requirements. But if this is done through a procurement, then the requirements are standardized. Now, I think that before Javier also had mentioned the possibility of doing local procurements through a different process that maybe, Javier, you want to add to that. Depending on the value of the goods, it is worth to proceed with a grant, for example. Over to Javier.
Thank you, Sally. Yes, there would be certain situations where it would make more sense to procure any equipment or locally. So in this case, what is required by the local suppliers would be to provide a pro forma invoice. Normally, we will need 2 to 3 pro forma invoices by a local supplier, in which they will have to agree on a price and the validity of the offer. Normally would be 15 days or a month, but ideally it will be longer because we need to some time to process the request. So, and also it's very important, and it's very something that you need to pay attention to, is be careful when the pro forma invoice is issued in your local currency, because it could be a case that there are some exchange fluctuation, currency exchange fluctuation that can also make problems. So if possible, if they can issue the pro forma invoice, in US dollars, it would be probably easier. If not, we need to be careful of the currency exchange fluctuation. Thank you.
Vincent? I didn't understand what they say, country of the NPC.
The non-proliferation, I guess. This is what is mentioned.
Okay. But one additional thing, in my experience, I've noted that it's important that the supplier is credible, the credibility of the local supplier, issues including accessibility to their websites and all that, papers that demonstrate that these are credible. Oftentimes we have a process internally here that will keep an eye on it. There are some countries where local supply may be a big challenge, and in that case, we have gotten some help from a consolidated supplier here. That's a special consideration if a country has limitations in supply. But that's another thing. I wanted to comment, this may be related as well to the previous question on national versus regional or interregional. There are some things that we do through regional projects like procurement for participation in proficiency testing. When we initiate here, it may be like to a single supplier, because if you have 10, 20 countries, you can create for each one of them. So, but then usually the procuring officer, the contracting officer interacts closely with the supplier, and the supplier may link up with you as the end user, and there may be need for registration. For some countries, you need to register to participate in those duties. So that's something to keep an eye on.
Thank you, James. So we have a minute left. I would like maybe to take 2 questions still.
For that, may I clarify a little bit?
Sure.
Marina, can you go back to, I think the NPC is meant national project counterpart, not about,
Yes, sorry, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So we have here on the a question on the procurement duration. How many days does it usually take from the planning to the official closure? Maybe here we can have actually an example from Malaysia and Mongolia. Do you have an idea, for example, of the time it takes? Could you take that one, our colleagues from Malaysia? Dr. Paida and Kamaluddin?
Yes, I think this can be an open question to everybody actually involved. So there's no specific time in my experience. So some are fortunate that it arrives in a short time, others take a while. So we just need to start early, keep on communicating. I think for me, the procurement is everybody's business. If you stick by the structured method, then, but everybody has to be interested. The counterpart, the requester, the buyer, the PMO. At the end of the day, we have a 2-year project, so we want procurement to arrive at the earliest possibility. So everybody needs to play a role. It doesn't hurt if someone who that's not designated to do something just takes interest and follows. And also, we need to move away from the sticking to official communication. We have been able to realize good results through informal communications. Thank you.
Thank you, James. I see that Tuya is trying to connect. Tuya, you want to add something?
Thank you very much. As James said, essentially what is it? It's a regional project or national project. And for Mongolia, I would say it can take from 3 months or 3 months, something like that.
Thank you, Tuya. So for the sake of time, I'm going to take one last question. Hussein, if you can display one. Yes, thank you. Can we get the support from the local agents or suppliers for installation, instrument training when applicable, and after-sales services? Sure, please.
Just very quickly. If this is part of the requirements at the planning stage, again, this is why it's important to determine at the planning whether you would be requiring training, installation, and after-sales services. As James mentioned before in the presentation, if that's the case, then we will include it in the specifications. So it will be for the supplier to provide that. Then, as part of the requirements, if there is the preferred to have, or a preference to have a local representation, we will also include that as part of the procurement as a requirement, that they should have local representation, otherwise regional representation to provide after-sales services. And normally, in my experience, this will be after the warranty period is over. So the warranty period is covered within the purchase order of the agency. So it's part of what we paid as part of the acquisition. And then if you require after-sales services, we could ask the supplier to provide, as part of their quote, also information on the costing. And I think this is a very valid question here, because it is important that you also are aware for future budgeting and sustainability that also have been mentioned. And James, it is very important maybe for you to know already now what will be the cost after the warranty is over, in case that you need preventive maintenance or any other type of after-sales services. With that, then, we will include it in the purchase order, and in the requirements as an option to you that you can use to contract either through the purchase order we issue mentioning, look, you agree with the agency, this yearly price for the after-sales services that we would like to order directly from you. But again, that will be you directly with the supplier after the warranty period. Or you may choose not to contract with the supplier that we have selected, and you may also go ahead and hire at your cost after-sales services from any other local supplier that you wish. I hope that clarifies.
Vincent, the person who asked this question, this is a very, very, very important question. And I personally always include this in my technical specifications, and many technical officers are keen on this because at the end of the day, we want a service that is sustainable and also closer as possible to you. So we ask the bidders to provide a clear statement and a plan of how they will arrange services. And this is when if you are in Malaysia, it doesn't make good sense if the supply or the source of support is going to come from East Africa. So that is trouble for you and for everybody. So we encourage that the suppliers always develop local support, and this is good always for you. And we include it in after sale, maybe after we have sold, but if the project may have closed even, but later on you need to keep it going. But if we have, through the sourcing of their support, established and obtained support from a company that understands the local needs, then that is long-lasting for you. So this is a very, very important question, and the counterparts need to always support their technical officers and everybody, and can state this wish clearly, and many of them do anyway.
Thank you, James. If you have any other questions, I'm speaking here to the participants, just send me an email directly and I will forward it to the panelists so that you receive at least an answer per email. But this will be time for me to close this webinar. While I'm asking the panelists to turn on their videos for a last picture, for a group photo, I would like to thank you all for attending this webinar on procurement. We are almost 190 participants, so this is a great success. Thank you to the panelists for the insights and you participants for your questions. I really hope this was helpful. Again, this event was recorded and will be made available on the TC website, including with the slides. Thank you also specifically to Hussein and Christina who made this webinar possible. It's much appreciated. And I invite you all participants to attend the webinar next week on human resources components of the TC program. Have a nice day, have a nice evening, and see you very soon on another IAEA virtual event.